After working as the owner of the game for over 5 years, Jukala has cemented herself as an icon of the EToH community. Or EToH, I guess. We'll get back to that later. Anyway, up until recently, her name was the front of the game, and she was very clearly shown as the owner in the credits room of every area. However, as most of you have probably seen, this is not the case anymore. A lot of things happened leading up to her eventual resignation, and I've yet to see a full timeline covering everything that happened. So, I made a timeline, all the way from the first public drama to today, fully covering Starting at the beginning of the timeline, November 3rd is when the game really started to fall apart. 10 of the game's major staff members stepped down, including Dusk Pyramid, The Burbs Word, Vendetta 06, Dispensable Array, and most notably Gamator, who had worked as the co-owner of the game ever since EToH was first born. The game's stability was already starting to fall apart with the infrequent updates and the new lore that Juke was trying to add, but this is really what started the beginning of the end. The reasons for leaving slightly differed between developers, but they were all generally related to mismanagement and creative differences. Shortly after this, Juke made a quick response, saying that the staff team leaving was due to a statement she had made addressing creative differences that had escalated to conflicts. She also announced a restructuring of the staff team, and weirdest of all, completely restarted Purgatorio for some reason. Because of all the quick changes, the community started to freak out, but nothing much happened until November 9th, where the former staff team released an 88-page document criticizing Juke for her mismanagement of the game. There's a lot to cover in this, but the general consensus the community came up with is that Juke is not a good owner. I didn't really like the simplicity of that claim, so I decided to sit down and read the entire thing, and I'm so glad I did. It revealed a lot of extreme examples of her neglectfulness, favoritism, and overall demotivation towards the game. I'm gonna try to summarize this as best as I can, but there's a lot to go over here. First of all, Juke is lazy. When asked questions, she will take up to days to give a very small or vague answer, leaving the devs confused and unsure what she wants. If the devs don't figure it out, Juke will demand it to be drastically changed or even completely removed and fixed within a very small time span because it doesn't fit her vision. She even went as far as comparing Purgatorio to a mega fun obby because it quote-unquote didn't stand out from other Roblox games. When she discussed removing it, which we know she eventually did, the people still working on it were not told until it actually happened. This lack of communication led to ETernals making almost all of the Zone 9 lobby by themselves, and because of this, many issues that the other devs pointed out were never fixed by release. Juke will also very often override or outright ignore developer polls and opinions to add whatever she wants. A good example of this is when she tried to remove TOZA from Zone 5 because she didn't like it, even though she apparently doesn't even have the skill to play it properly. She also hired 2 other people onto the dev team for selfish reasons, despite almost all of the dev team advising against it. In general, she prioritizes the story, lore, and combat way more than the actual gameplay, which is especially important for a game literally about parkour. In Purgatorio, while the rest of the devs were focused on making a functioning and engaging tutorial, Juke really only cared if it fit in with the story introduction. On top of this, she was very out of the loop and knew very little about current developer projects, even to the point of not knowing there was an event until it was almost done. Worst of all, she hosted the infamous VR chat meeting, despite a majority of the staff preferring text meetings, and because of VR chat being inaccessible to people without VR, only a few developers were able to attend. All of these developers, besides Gamma, who was only there to record it, happened to be Juke's friends, who ended up just talking about all the other developers who weren't there. Throughout the 2-hour-long meeting, they discussed problems about the other staff members and if or when they should be punished or outright demoted based on claims with very little evidence. By the end, a total of 4 developers would be punished. Gamma was the only one to stand up and oppose their claims, and he says that if he wasn't there, there's a good chance that most of the developers they talked about would be punished even more heavily. Okay, so that was a lot to go over. The community obviously did not like this very much. Their own owner, who we had looked up to for 5 years, was a fraud? The majority was already a little suspicious with the infrequent updates and the very small community connection she had, but this was the last straw. Unfortunately, there was nothing the community could really do, so they simply complained in the Discord and the concurrent players slightly ticked down, but at this point the game was already considered to be dying. 3 days later, Jukala and one of the other developers talked about in the document, ETernals, finally responded. Along with other things, they said that they know what needs to be done to fix the problem and that they'll start to work on it behind the scenes. Jukala also mentioned that she'll start to work on a document to address some of the points that were made against her, but considering her work schedule, she probably won't be releasing it anytime soon. Anyways, fast forward 2 months or so, and things have generally stayed the same. The game is pretty much back to normal, and the Jukala drama is rarely brought up anymore, but it's still in the back of everyone's minds. During this quiet period, Gamator returns to the staff team on December 6th. Everyone celebrates his return, although a majority of the player base already expected him to return sometime soon. Besides that, EToH is running as usual until finally, on January 14th, Jukala finally releases a response document. It's only a fraction of the size of the initial one, and it did take 2 months for her to finish, but at least it's something. Due to its length, there's a lot less to go over here, but she just goes over some of the points made in the original document and tries to defend herself or provide some other evidence that proves her innocence. In my opinion, her arguments are pretty weak. A lot of her counter-arguments are kind of just her admitting that she should have done better. A good example of this is with Purgatorio, because while she does mention that some of the claims the staff team made were exaggerated, half of that section is just her talking about her own mistakes. My least favorite point is near the end, where she says that she never favored friends or acquaintances, but instead people that understood her best, which to me kinda just sounds like a different way to say friends. However, if you're interested, I do suggest going to the link in the description and reading it for yourself to form your own opinion. Don't blindly listen to some random guy on the internet. Now that the document is released, surely the community will forgive Juke and the game can keep running as usual. Oh. So, people did not like her response. Many people agree that her counter-arguments were weak, especially because, again, this document took 2 months to make. Along with this, and everything else that had gone on recently, everyone knew that this game was on thin ice. And finally, after teetering on the edge of relevancy for over 2 months, the killing blow was dealt. Juke was exposed for privately taking 70% of the game's funds over the course of her ownership, which totaled to 28.5 million Robux in 2021 alone, which is equal to about $356,000. Now, the weird thing about this is while it did happen, I can't find where it was initially revealed. I checked everywhere on the wiki, the Discord, and the documents for about an hour, but the best thing I could find was this paragraph on page 50 on the initial document, which does mention the money she takes, but doesn't give any specific details about the numbers. After asking around, I was told that Jukala actually admitted to taking the money on her response document, but it was quickly removed. I can't tell if this is true because I can't check the document's version history, but I really don't know. We know it was found on January 16th at the latest because of this message at the top of the initial document. Actually, not even the wiki knows the exact day it happened. However, no matter when it was revealed, it took at least a full day for the information to spread, for the game to really be ripped to shreds. The community was in shock. Everyone was talking about what happened. 2 days later, on January 18th, the developers finally stepped in. However, instead of trying to calm the situation, they were just as angry as everyone else. After all, it was their money that was stolen from them. They planned a new event, the 28.5 million event, to be released in the future. It was going to be very similar to the design of the 100 million event, but with 2 different towers instead of the 4 mini towers. There would be a terrifying mini tower, and this weird collab called Tower of Saving EToH 2. The entire thing was a complete joke, but it actually was supposed to have 2 cosmetics for beating the towers, which is a little weird. Also on January 18th, the monthly tower, Tower of Lavish Embellishment, was renamed to Tower of Lavish Embezzlement by creator request, which ended up becoming a huge meme throughout the entire situation. The next day, on January 19th, the chaos was still going strong. Juke's embezzlement was still the only thing on people's minds. The 28.5 million event was almost finished, and new Discord accounts were made solely to troll. A developer Damjom sold access to talk in the Epic Stuff channel for 400 Robux apiece, which got 85 purchases. He also talked about selling the verified builder role for 10,000 Robux, but I can't find any evidence of that ever happening. After just an hour, he made 37,000 Robux from selling the roles, which is apparently more money than a lot of developers have ever made in the span of working on the game. Eventually, all of this chaos finally prompted the head developer to completely lock down the server. You couldn't talk anywhere unless you had the builder role, and server invites were paused, meaning nobody could join. The chaos cooled down a lot, but builders and developers alike were still active. Later that day, a new event was released called the Stronghold. It was about the same level of quality as an April Fool's event, if not worse. There were 5 mini towers, all of very low quality and with horrible gameplay. There's nothing much to say about this area because there's nothing much in it. The lobby was empty and the towers were awful. The weirdest part is that the portal to the event was right in the middle of the Ring 1 lobby, which made it very easy for new players to randomly stumble across it and be very confused. However, at this point, nobody was really expecting the game to survive unless Juke stepped down. In fact, many people were in favor of temporarily shutting down the game to stop supporting it. Unfortunately, that never happened, but the developers did ask to stop playing it, which makes me wonder why they didn't just temporarily close it. Anyway, through January 19th and 20th, a lot of creators with towers in-game were requesting for them to be removed. This was done to try to jeopardize as much of the game as possible to convince Juke to step down. According to the wiki, the full list they show doesn't actually include every tower that was requested to be removed, but the list they do show still contains 47 towers, including at least 1 tower from almost every area in the game. Some of the most notable ones include Citadel of Peril, Citadel of Wacky Strategy, Tower of Difficulty Chart, Tower of Descent into Exile, and most importantly, Tower of Cruel Punishment. If TOCP was actually removed, it would have made Tower of Elongated Runs the hardest tower in the game again. However, GameMater actually revealed later that removing your towers from the game wasn't even allowed ever since 2020, so these requests were basically for nothing. I still wanted to mention this to show just how disapproving the community was of Juke. They were willing to remove their own creation and destroy the game to get rid of her. Many people assumed that EToH as we knew it was done for. that Juke would never step down and continue to drive the game into the ground. However, that reality never came true. Surprisingly, on January 21st, Jukala finally stepped down as owner from the game. She posted her final message, talking about how she had been losing passion for the game for months and apologizing for her actions over the years. She also mentioned that she plans to work on a game outside of Roblox focusing around the lore that she's tried to build up in EToH over the last few years with more freedom than before. The issue was that she had been trying to build a game within an already existing game, a story-based game inside of a parkour game. She was probably too worried to split her focus between EToH and this new potential game, so she tried fitting her story ideas into EToH, which clearly didn't work out very well. After 6 years, she had officially resigned and gave ownership to Aeternalis. Their first order of business was to promote Gammator to head developer, and then 7 hours later announced that they'd be doing a dual ownership between them and Gamma. After all that happened, everyone is glad to finally see a good conclusion. If you're only focusing on the actual drama, this would be the end of the story. But it's also interesting to look at the repercussions of what happened. On the same day that Juke quit, a lot of things were changed or reverted. Later that day, the Discord server would reopen. Along with that, the version of Purgatorio that was scrapped by Juke in November was reconfirmed, all of the requests to remove towers from the game were revoked, the Stronghold was moved to the Elevator Seeker and then removed 3 days later, and the 28.5 million event was cancelled. A few days later, after the whole situation had cooled down, a lot of things began to change. On January 28th, the concept of branching areas that Juke proposed, considering a complete overhaul of the game's progression and structuring, was scrapped completely, along with the term branching area being renamed back to subrealms. 2 days later, Silent Abyss was moved from a Lost River subrealm to a Ring 4 subrealm, now that they don't have to worry about Juke's lore implementation. Along with this, the fast travel orb in the Ring Selects was re-added. It's a small change, but a step in the right direction. Unfortunately though, not every change is a good one. On February 2nd, the second half of the Christmas event, containing a boss fight in Remorseless Steeple, was scrapped and delayed until next year, because all of the issues delaying their progress. Although, all of these changes left one big question in people's minds. What would the new name be? It can't stay as Juke's Towers of Hell, but what would they change it to now that they're both owners? Choosing only one owner to represent the name of the game wouldn't be fair, so people were curious about what they would decide. A lot of people were theorizing what the name would become. The main things that people thought of were Gamma's Towers of Hell, Aeternalis' Towers of Hell, or something else starting with a J. However, this question wouldn't be answered until 2 weeks later on February 4th. They finally announced an official rename of the game, from Juke's Towers of Hell to Eternal Towers of Hell. The reaction to this change was very mixed. On one hand, Juke couldn't have stayed in the name after she resigned, and a name change was bound to happen. On the other hand, the iconic EToH acronym was now EToH? It doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it? We had KToH, JToH, and now EToH? It doesn't really work very well. Despite that, I'm fine with the name being changed, but there actually are some practical issues with it. The main one is that now that JToH is EToH, the keyword JToH on YouTube will no longer bring up newer videos, or at least not as well. Because there have been 6 years of JToH content on the platform, YouTube learning that the name has changed to EToH will probably take a while, and that might hurt the EToH content creation feel for a while. Sure, everybody could change their thumbnails and titles to EToH to prevent them from being outdated, but is that really a feasible option? And even if that did happen, the content inside the videos themselves still mention the acronym JToH, which would confuse new players and the YouTube algorithm. All in all, I'm glad it's changed, and I'm sure I'll get used to it in a few months or so, but it's just so jarring. Now that EToH had entered a new era of the game, updates really started to take off. Everything past this point is a little unnecessary to add to a definitive timeline. The exact day they took place isn't important, but more so how quickly it happened. First off, many older towers in the first few rings had been slightly modified to make traps or unfair sections easier to sight read for newer players. The most surprising one to me was the nerf to Tower of Cold Hands, changing the infamous jumps on floors 3 and 7, and subsequently nerfing the difficulty to baseline difficult. A few days later, Ring 7 got a complete lobby overhaul, transforming it from this to this. A few weeks later, they also released a Ring 2 lobby revamp, which is amazing. Next up, we have the tower additions. A new mini tower, far from a surprising tower, was added to Ring 7 along with the lobby revamp. And like 7 out of 10, I guess. Cool, but the final stretch is literally half the tower. And also... Anyway, the next day, a new tower was added to Ring 1 after over 6.5 years. It's called Tower of Noticeable Infuriation, which is actually just a renamed version of Tower of Infuriation from the Legacy event, and if you've watched my channel for a while, you know how I feel about that event. Luckily though, I think this is the best tower they could have added to the main game. It fixed the huge difficulty gap between Tower of Madness and Tower of Heck, and the gameplay fits in with the area really well. The devs kept up the pace by adding another mini tower, this time in Garden of Eshel, called Not Even a Flower. And 5 out of 10. Fun gameplay, but way too much for a mini tower. Aggressive final stretches do not work in a 3-minute challenging tower. And surprisingly, on the same day, they also released a full revamp of Tower of Madness. I was expecting a lot less, but this is pretty much a new tower at this point. Like look! Floors 5, 9, and 10 have actual gameplay now! 9 out of 10. Great addition, but might take a while to get used to. This is already a lot of new content in just a month, but there's still one type of content I haven't mentioned yet. YouTube. 2 new very popular YouTubers have entered the EToH scene. First, we have Bundun, a shorts creator with nearly 2 million subscribers. He's been streaming EToH pretty consistently for about a month now as of writing this video, and he's actually been playing really well, unlike other people. So far, his hardest is Tower of Keyboard Eating, and his avatar has already been permanently engraved in the game's history with a small balcony at the top of Tower of Heck. He's introduced a ton of new players to the game, which is a great time to do it now that everything is being revamped to be better for new players. Secondly, Jellybean, with nearly 6 million subscribers, has tried EToH as well. Yes, that Jellybean. Apparently, she also spread it to her other YouTuber friends to try out, but I couldn't find any proof of that. These streamers, along with all the new updates that have been releasing recently, have spiked the game's popularity higher than it's ever been. EToH is in a state of repairs right now, removing issues that were overlooked before, and overall fixing the early game as a whole. I can't be entirely sure that it was Juke's fault that this never happened before, but what I am sure of is that work is getting done faster and better now that she's gone. Last year, when EToH was at its worst, only about 5, maybe 6 meaningful things were released. This year, with new ownership, new ideas, and a new path for the game, the amount of things released just in February alone is almost equal to the things released in all of 2024. Along with that, the game's Trello page also reveals that they plan to release 4 new areas, 2 events, Biotech Genesis, a bunch of lobby revamps, and more tower rebalances in just this year. All of these changes are ultimately leading towards a new goal: make the game more beginner-friendly. Back in 2020, when I first started playing, the game was brutal. Forgotten Ridge wasn't a thing yet, so to unlock Ring 2, you had to jump from Tower of Madness to Tower of Heck, which was not easy. Even if you managed to do that, the easiest tower in Ring 2 was harder than Tower of Heck anyway, since TOPS and TOBH didn't exist yet. You almost needed prior obby experience, or a lot of dedication, to even get to Ring 3. Nowadays, we have Forgotten Ridge for easy steeples, Garden of Eshel for an introduction to modern towers, TOPS and TOBH for an easier Ring 2, and overall a much better time for new players. And with Purgatorio set to release sometime this summer, it's going to get even easier for people to get into the game. It's definitely surprising seeing all of the famous classic towers being changed, especially for people who have played this game for years, but I think this is great. The game is finally growing for the first time in a while, and an update is definitely in order. The amount of concurrent players in EToH has almost tripled from last year, and I'm glad the devs are taking this opportunity and doing something with it. After 5 years, Eternal Towers of Hell is finally going through a renaissance, and I'm interested to see where this game goes. That's all for now. Good night, everyone.